I don't know if All-Star Baseball 2004 is a good baseball game or not, but I sure didn't like it. The 3D character models look pretty good, but I imagine they're simply 2D stills animated into 3D instead of being actually 3D, but that's okay. The stadiums look nice, and pitching and fielding work as you might expect, but I absolutely hated going up to bat. The window for aiming your bat is just too narrow. I found it way too difficult to have any control over where the ball went. Even being able to hit the damn ball felt like a miracle. To be fair, baseball games aren't my favorite sports games, but I've played much better ones than All-Star Baseball 2004. Baseball is one of those sports that I feel is hard to emulate in a video game. Aiming a cursor to pinpoint where a pitch will be within a box and hitting a button doesn't really do a good job of feeling like swinging a bat. It feels more like a Mario Party minigame than a fleshed out system for such an iconic and popular sport like baseball. But for some reason, that has been the go-to control method for nearly every baseball game I've ever played. Thankfully, Baseball Advance is one of the best versions of this system that I've ever played. Once the ball is pitched, it features a shrinking reticule, kind of like those found in Elite Beat Agents for the DS, and you have to aim the cursor and hit the ball at the moment that the two intersect. Compared to other baseball games on the GBA, I found that this system allowed me to hit the ball rather consistently. Fielding and pitching functions the same way most other baseball games do, and it works well here. While fielding is just 2D, Behind the Mound features excellent looking pre-rendered 3D sprites that animate well and sell the faux 3D effect. It's a pretty workman-like style without much flair, but it makes for a really consistent and decent looking game of baseball. I'd recommend Baseball Advance over any other baseball game on the GBA if you're looking for a classic, very traditional, but well-made baseball game. It might not be flashy, but it is a lot of fun. Crushed Baseball is fascinating to look at. It's one of only 2 baseball games on the GBA where the fielding element is rendered in full 3D. Not only that, but batting transitions seamlessly to fielding with a dramatic camera pan up as the ball flies into the outfield. It's a really cool effect. The game itself is rather stuttery though. It's not unplayable, and I had a good bit of fun with it, but it's not the smoothest game of baseball. There's a bunch of fun arcadey touches that make Crushed Baseball stand out from its more traditional peers. You can throw special pitches and even soup up your batter with extra power for stronger hits. It's worth mentioning that this is a purely fictional game though, as it doesn't have any official MLB licensed teams. I'm surprised how much fun I had with Crushed Baseball. It's not going to blow your White Sox off, but if you're looking for a competent arcade baseball game on the GBA, this is the one to play. While it's not a very good game, I had a bit of fun with David Bekham on the GBA. It's about as simple a soccer game as they come, with buttons for pass, shoot, slide tackle, and change character, and that's about it. I couldn't find a sprint button, like in FIFA, nor any sort of footwork dodge mechanic. The one enormous downside to this game is the frequency of penalties. Oh my god, these refs don't let anything pass. Since there isn't a steal button, the only option is to slide tackle, and if you do that from anything but the most optimal angle, you'll get called for it. This ruins the flow of gameplay and is extremely frustrating. I wouldn't play this one again, nor is it better than a lot of the other soccer games on the GBA, but IGN scored this a 2.2 back in the day, and I really don't think it's quite that bad. Davis Cup on the GBA looks fantastic. The 3D character models animate beautifully as they move forward and backward in space, and the depth of field of the courts as the camera pans left and right look great too. Unfortunately, for some reason, the ball remains 2D, and this is a problem. See, one of the first things you learn when playing tennis is to look at the rotation of the ball in order to help judge its location in space. It's also a good trick for catching a ball, but in Davis Cup, the ball doesn't appear to rotate at all. It simply floats back and forth between you and your opponent, and it's easier to judge the ball's location based on the shadow than it is to watch the ball itself. This means I ended up whiffing far more often than I should have. It's also much more difficult to control the placement of your shots than it should be. I'm sure these issues could have been fixed in a bunch of different ways, but unfortunately, it turns what could have been an excellent game of tennis into a middling one. Aesthetically, I really like Disney Sports Snowboarding a whole lot. While not truly 3D, it does a very good job of using pre-rendered scrolling backgrounds to simulate 3D. It's a style I personally really like, and it does a good job selling the illusion. But the game itself sucks. The trick system is okay, and I love some of the little details, like being able to play as Chippendale, each rodent taking up one boot of the snowboard each. But the core gameplay is razor thin, and there's hardly any content here. There's really only 2 environments, with every other one simply being a palette swap of stages you've already played. It feels like all of the effort was spent on the look of the game, with nothing left over for the actual gameplay and content. It's a shame too, because this is a really unique looking game, and with some better controls, more levels, and meatier content, this could have been a very cool portable 3D snowboarding game. But as it is, it's worth checking out for the aesthetic, but there are much better snowboarding games on the GBA. I'm going to show you the only 3D part of ESPN Final Round Golf. You ready? Here it is. Yep, that's it. Moving on. ESPN International Winter Sports is essentially a minigame collection, 2 of which are in Mode 7 style 3D, and both of them suck. You have skiing and snowboarding, both of which see you moving across a flat Mode 7 style plane, weaving between slalom flags. These 3D stages are honestly more bare bones than some of the bonus 3D stages in those licensed Disney platformers. There's nothing fun here. Please skip this one. Robot Wars is the UK spin-off of the US's BattleBot TV show. The point of the show is that ambitious engineers cobble together robots and set them loose in an arena with various traps, and the first one to destroy the others wins. The show was fairly entertaining back in the early 2000s, although it does seem a bit antiquated today. I think a modern take using the tech from Boston Dynamics would make for some excellent, albeit terrifying, television. Unfortunately, the GBA version of these robotic gladiatorial battles is pretty bad. The 3D looks okay, it just doesn't play very well. Each robot only has one attack, and you'll spend most of the game just spinning around your opponent hitting air. On the off chance that you can goad them into a corner, your attacks feel like you've got marshmallows attached to your mallet. There's almost no visual impact for your attacks, and sometimes it's hard to tell if you're even hitting anything. Robot Wars Extreme Destruction is honestly one of the worst fighting games that I've played. There's really nothing here to recommend. Okay, so I know combining all of the FIFA games is kind of cheating a bit, but whatever. There are 6 different FIFA games on the GBA. FIFA 2003, FIFA 2004, FIFA 2005, FIFA 2006, FIFA World Cup Germany 2006, and FIFA 2007. I played a bit of each, and they all provide very competent games of soccer. I'm really impressed by how they all feel incredibly similar to their console counterparts. The most interesting thing to me with these games is how they progressed graphically. FIFA 2003 looks fairly rudimentary compared to the later outings. There's only one camera angle, the characters look a bit stiff, and the crowd is a bunch of lifeless cutouts. Although, to FIFA 2003's credit, the ball animation looks better than in any other games on this list. FIFA 2004 looks nearly identical to FIFA 2003. If there are changes here, they're iterative instead of revolutionary, and I could hardly tell the difference. Things get much more interesting with FIFA 2005. The camera has been pulled way back, and everything looks more fluid, thanks to what seems to be an entirely new 3D engine. This is the first game to introduce replays into the mix too, allowing you to flip through different camera angles to best view your goals. But it's FIFA 2006 where things get truly crazy. While the frame rate seems to have taken a bit of a hit, FIFA 2006 introduces fully 3D replays, where you can zoom in and out and spin the camera around freely, fast forwarding and speeding up as you see fit. This blew my mind when I realized what was going on. FIFA World Cup Germany 2006 zooms the camera back in and fixes some of the frame rate problems. FIFA 2007 feels like the final iteration and had the best balance of frame rate and impressive 3D. Checking these all out in order was a fascinating look at the evolution of a concept over the life of a console, as well as how the advancements and refinements of 3D really elevate what is otherwise very simple experiences. I definitely recommend checking out every one of the FIFA games on the GBA. Formation Soccer should be called Red Card, the game. Released exclusively in Japan, Formation Soccer is actually an incredibly impressive looking soccer game. The 3D field scrolls smoothly, with the camera accelerating nicely with the speed of the ball, good character animations, and an overall clean aesthetic. The problem is, once you get into the game, you'll find that one specific element has been turned way too high: the refs. The refs are the most cautious, card-hungry refs I've ever seen. They are just itching to throw players out of the game. I found it was nearly impossible to steal the ball from the other team without having a whistle blown on me. In the very first game, I got 5 yellow cards and 2 red cards. Not for slide tackling from behind, but for simply trying to steal the ball at an angle. It's actually kind of hilarious, but unfortunately, it kills the pacing of a match, and it wasn't long until I was rolling my eyes every time it happened. Formation Soccer is worth checking out if you're going through all of the 3D soccer games on the GBA. It's not the worst one, and it has a really unique look, but the refs really killed the fun for me. Okay, so Killer 3D Pool is the definition of a bargain bin game. But that doesn't mean it's terrible. It's an incredibly simple game, with 4 styles of pool to play. There's no story mode, no progression system, and no incentive to keep playing whatsoever, unless you just want a simple game of 3D pool on your GBA. Surprisingly, for being so bare bones, it actually plays alright and looks pretty damn good. You move around a fully 3D pool table, lining up your shots and, well, playing variations of pool. The 3D is rather impressive, actually. It runs smoothly enough, and spinning around the table in 3D is impressive. The gameplay, on the other hand, is just alright. You pull back the Q using the D-pad and then press the A button to shoot. The problem is that it's extremely finicky about how far you pull back, and more often than not, you'll shoot too hard. Finesse is difficult to master here, but I did start to get a better handle on it the more I played. Also, the character selection here is downright weird. Overall, Killer 3D Pool isn't great, but it's worth checking out if you're interested in a simple game of 3D pool on the GBA. Kurohige no Golf is by far the most graphically ambitious sports game on the GBA. Released only in Japan, Kurohige no Golf is essentially Mario Golf 64, with characters that I've never heard of before. But don't let the language barrier prevent you from playing this one, as most of it's in English and you'll be missing out on one of the most visually impressive games on the GBA. The courses are rendered in full 3D, not still images of 3D areas like in Mario Golf Advance, and not just 3D when behind the player, but fully 3D at all times, including the ability to spin around in real time to adjust your shot and crazy camera moves that show off the entire hole while the ball is airborne. It's insanely impressive to see this running on the GBA. Granted, those 3D environments are pretty basic looking, but that doesn't make it any less cool. I love the 2D character models too. Their sprites are enormous and wonderfully animated. Surprisingly, it plays well too. Actually, if you've ever played Mario Golf 64, you basically know exactly what to expect with Kurohige no Golf. It may not be quite as polished as Mario Golf Excursions, but this ended up being my favorite golf game on the GBA. I highly recommend Kurohige no Golf to anyone who's looking for a visually impressive arcade golf game on the GBA. Much like FIFA, I found Madden on the GBA to be fascinating because of how it evolved over time. Madden 2003 looks like it's almost using some sort of Mode 7 graphics in order to render its field. When you're receiving a kick or sprinting down the field, the camera will tilt, changing the angle of the field, and it's a pretty cool effect. Otherwise, graphically, Madden 2003 is a pretty simple affair. The animations are rough and the character models all look identical. It's a good take on portable Madden, but the later games get progressively more impressive, except for Madden 2004. Madden 2004 is Madden 2003 as far as I could tell. Madden 2005, on the other hand, is an entirely different beast. As EA did with FIFA, Madden 2005 jumped from a pseudo 3D engine to a fully 3D engine, and the jump in ambition is really impressive. Characters and environments move far more smoothly, animate more realistically, and overall are just more technically similar to Madden on home consoles. The only downgrade I could see was the ball itself. It looks so much worse for some reason. I'd love to know what happened to the ball animations in Madden and FIFA in the jump to true 3D on the GBA. Madden 2006 and Madden 2007 look nearly identical to Madden 2005 to my eye, although the colors do seem to be a bit less saturated than 05 for some reason. Madden 2007 ended up being my favorite of the bunch. It looked the best, ran the best, and played the best. It's kind of amazing how similar to console Madden this GBA version really is. If you're looking for Madden on the GBA, Madden 2007 is the best of the bunch, but you really can't go wrong with any of them, and it was fun to watch how they progressed over time. I really loved the Camelot Mario sports games as a kid. While Mario Tennis on the Game Boy Color will always be my favorite Mario sports game, Mario Golf Advance Tour is a really impressive portable take on Mario Golf. The standout feature in these portable Camelot Mario sports games is that they're secretly RPGs, but instead of combat, you're smashing balls off tees or playing some tennis. Mario Golf Advance Tour is one of the most fleshed out sports games on the GBA, with various upgrade trees, tons of courses, and a fully fleshed out story mode. What sets this game apart from its Game Boy Color counterpoint is the upgrade from 2D sprites to a fully 3D world. Well, kinda fully 3D. Each hole has been laid out in 3D from the ground perspective, as well as in a Mode 7 style top-down perspective. You'll aim from the top-down perspective, and then cut to the ground level 3D perspective. Now you can rotate while behind your character, but the screen won't scroll naturally as it will in the console Mario Golf games. Instead, it will cut to black as you pan around the environment. It's an effective way to only have to render 2D stills of the 3D environments, but I can only imagine how much more impressive this 3D effect would have been if it had allowed you to pan around the environment freely. This doesn't distract from the gameplay even a little bit, but it's fun to think about. It's really impressive how well the ground level 3D environments match up with how the course looks from the top-down perspective. Trees are where you'd expect them to be, and there's even subtle details like differences in elevation that really sell the whole thing. The one issue I had with Mario Golf Advance Tour is that once you get further on in the game, it can become exceptionally difficult. There's little room for error on the harder challenges, and completing the game can be a real chore. It's been a while since I tried playing this all the way through, but I just remember it being a pain. But this is one of those GBA games that I'll pretty consistently dive back into for a round or two of fun golf. While not the most graphically impressive game on the GBA, this is a fully fleshed out package, and I highly recommend checking out Mario Golf Advance Tour. Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance on the GBA is an extremely impressive recreation of the Mortal Kombat home console games from the early 2000s. While the character models themselves are pre-rendered sprites, the backgrounds are fully 3D, and actually scroll around your character as you move into the foreground or background, which does a really good job selling the 3D arena effect. All of the fighting moves you'd expect have survived the demake, but unfortunately the roster itself is pretty bare bones. Surprisingly, there are a bunch of fatalities too, and they're pretty goofy. They're bloody, especially by GBA standards, but for some reason, the only organs you'll be pulling out are stomachs. And sometimes you're even pulling out 2 or 3 stomachs at once. It's actually pretty funny. The only other downside to this portable take on Mortal Kombat is that sometimes it can feel a bit sluggish. It doesn't quite have the speed of the home console version. On the whole, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance is a great first take on 3D portable Mortal Kombat, although its sequel is much better in nearly every way. Mortal Kombat Tournament Edition takes everything great about Deadly Alliance and makes it even better, even if only slightly. It plays a bit faster, and the character roster's been expanded, but unfortunately, the stomachs have been removed. Fatalities just result in blood this time, not multiple stomachs, which is kind of a shame, but also makes a lot more sense. Everything I said for Deadly Alliance remains true here. Tournament Edition isn't a huge improvement, as the game is more Deadly Alliance 1.5 than it is Deadly Alliance 2, but if you're just going to play one Mortal Kombat game on the GBA, this is the one I would pick. I love NFL Blitz on the N64. It's one of my favorite sports games of all time. When I found out there was a GBA version, I had some pretty high hopes. Unfortunately, NFL Blitz 2002 doesn't really feel like Blitz. The most Blitz thing in NFL Blitz 2002 on the GBA is the commentator. The character models move at what feels like 5 frames per second, and the animation is terrible, except for the tackle animation, which is much smoother than anything else in the game, which I guess makes sense. It's also extremely easy. It seems like on every play, one of my receivers was always open, so it really just amounted to pressing the right direction when throwing to make sure the open receiver got the ball. To the game's credit, it does make me feel like a god-tier QB, but that's all the game really has going for it. None of it is outright bad, and I still had some fun with it, but there's not much here that stands out either. If you want to feel like the best football player on the planet, this is the game for that. But otherwise, you can skip NFL Blitz 2002. NFL Blitz 2003 is a case of 1 step forward, 2 big steps back. The biggest improvement on the graphical front from Blitz 2002 is that the camera will now pan around during an interception and zoom in when you catch the ball. The character models have changed as well, and I think they're actually worse. It's weird, they look more like their home console Blitz 64 counterparts, but the look doesn't really work here. They just look weird. There's been some updates to the animation too, with more tackle animations, but the rest of the animations just look worse. The running animations looked clear enough in Blitz 2002, but here they look like a blurry mess. The biggest addition here is that you are now allowed to tackle the hell out of the opponents at will between plays, just like the console version. It's a detail like this that makes Blitz, well, Blitz, and it's a nice inclusion. Overall, I think I'd rather play NFL Blitz 2002, but both of these games are a far cry from their home console outings. Despite its budget look and budget name, Premier Action Soccer isn't half bad. It looks pretty basic, with a 3D field populated by poorly animated 2D players, but that simple aesthetic allows the game to run extremely smoothly the entire time. The only real negative I found was that the AI just wasn't very good. This is a very easy game of soccer, and if you know how to position your players, your opponent really doesn't stand much of a chance. It's not the best soccer game on the GBA, nor is it much of a looker, but Premier Action Soccer is a fun time if you're looking for an easy breezy game of soccer. Shirin Monsters Netsal was released only in Japan, and as far as I can tell, it's a soccer game with a monster collecting element. I think. Some games are really import friendly, where you can easily have fun playing even if you don't speak the native language. Shirin Monsters Netsal is not one of those games. After nearly 10 full minutes of dialogue sections and aimlessly navigating through Japanese menus, I finally made it to the actual soccer portion of the game, and it's weird. For some reason, one of the buttons makes you turn into an onigiri? You only control one character, so it's mostly a game of positioning, making sure you're open in order to take a shot on goal. The 3D effect looks pretty cool, with big 2D sprites moving around a Mode 7 style field. Unfortunately, I couldn't get past the language barrier here in order to understand the game well enough to enjoy it, which leaves me in a strange place with a recommendation, because I imagine I might actually enjoy a whimsical take on soccer like this if I knew Japanese. But I don't, so I don't feel like I really have a good sense for how this game plays either. So it might be awesome, or it might really suck, I just don't know. So the best I can say is that if you read Japanese, check this out and let me know if it's any good. But if you don't read Japanese, leave Shirin Monsters Netsal alone. Sonic Fighters felt like it came out of nowhere back in 2003. Sonic Fighters is an impressive 3D brawler that is more fleshed out and intricately designed than it appears at first glance. The most notable thing about Sonic Fighters is its beautiful aesthetics. It's a really unique looking game with 2D pixel art characters moving around fully 3D battlegrounds. The pixel art is downright beautiful, with some of the most detailed and expressive sprites in any Sonic game. It can sometimes be hard to tell exactly where your character is in space, but it didn't prove to be that big of an issue over time. This is a big game too, with a good cast of characters, each with multiple different movesets, as well as a fully fleshed out story mode, complete with an explorable overworld and visual novel-esque dialogue scenes. While it takes a while to get to grips with the controls, there is a fairly high skill ceiling, and once you get a sense for the combos and flow of the combat, Sonic Fighters is a really fun and unique Sonic game. Sonic Fighters is definitely worth checking out. For a game based on a kids magazine, the developer for Sports Illustrated for Kids Baseball went hard with the graphics. Like Crushed Baseball, this is the only other baseball game on the GBA with a full 3D outfield, where the game transitions smoothly from batting to fielding, and it's a really cool effect. I just wish the rest of the game matched the visuals, as this one plays pretty terribly. It is just way too difficult to hit the ball. Each pitch has a trail of dust flying behind it that makes it extremely difficult to tell where the ball is in space. I played through 2 full games, and I think I only hit the ball past second base once. For a game made for kids, this is a problem. Despite the ambitious visuals, Sports Illustrated for Kids Baseball isn't worth checking out for more than a few innings. Sports Illustrated for Kids Football has the exact opposite problem to Sports Illustrated for Kids Baseball. It's absurdly easy. While not as visually interesting as the baseball version, Sports Illustrated for Kids Football looks fine. It's very basic, but it runs smoothly, except for the camera transitions, which are a choppy mess for some reason. Once you're playing though, you realize that either your deck is stacked, or the AI is a few cards short. This game honestly feels like you are playing as an NFL team and your opponent is the local youth team. It is extremely easy to receive the ball and proceed to run all the way to the end zone in a single play. At one point, I was doing loops around the defenders just to prove my point. I had more fun than I expected here, but it's sort of like having God mode turned on all the time. Sports Illustrated for Kids Football is not a serious football game. But if you want to feel what it's like to be Brett Favre playing football against a bunch of middle schoolers, this is the game for you. SSX is a consistently excellent series. The console version of SSX Tricky is one of the best extreme sports games of all time. SSX Tricky on the GBA is alright. The 3D courses are fairly impressive, it maintains some of the style from Tricky, and it all runs surprisingly smoothly. But there's one huge problem. It's so damn slow. SSX Tricky is mostly a racing game, and it has to be the slowest racing game I've ever played. There is absolutely no sense of speed in this game. It feels methodical, with your momentum grinding to a halt the moment you go off a jump. Also, the trick system here just isn't very much fun. It's a chore to pull off tricks, but thankfully it's pretty forgiving, so you don't have to worry too much about landing everything perfectly. Character models are all over the place too. Some characters look great, while others are a pixelated mess. For some reason, the NPC racers look like cardboard cutouts, with far less animation than your player character. And while you can push them off their boards if they get close, it's not very satisfying. Though perhaps the most disappointing aspect of SSX Tricky is how narrow the courses are. There's very little room for maneuverability, and if there are any NPCs around you, the courses get very cramped very quickly. Once you get to grips with what this game actually is and what it's not, it's an okay time. I didn't hate it, but it's not nearly as good as the next game in the series. Visual Impact, the developer who worked on Tricky, really upped their game for SSX 3. While Tricky felt greatly pared down compared to the original console release, SSX 3 feels much closer to the real thing. For starters, the level geometry is far more impressive, with wide open courses featuring multiple paths and tons of ramps, jumps, trees, and other nice environmental details. The character models are also rendered in full 3D this time instead of the faux 3D models in Tricky. The trick system also works much better here, with an enormous library of tricks to pull off. Not to mention the sense of speed and momentum really sells the idea of barreling down a snow hill strapped to a slab of metal. Smacking other riders off their boards is also much more rewarding here, as you'll feel the impact of your punches. That all sounds great, right? Well, unfortunately, all of those improvements come at the cost of the frame rate, and it's pretty bad. Does it ruin the gameplay? No, but it's not nearly as smooth as Tricky was. Also, the music is some of the worst music I've ever heard in a video game. Each track is simply a 15 to 30 second loop of a song with poorly compressed vocals, and some tracks go on for almost 10 minutes. So even if you liked these songs before playing the game, you'll come to loathe them very quickly. I beg you, play this game with the sound off. Despite the abysmal music and the bad frame rate, I still had a lot of fun with SSX 3. It's a much better representation of the series than SSX Tricky, and it boasts a really impressive 3D engine with wide open levels and great 3D character animations. I like SSX 3 on the GBA a whole lot, and I recommend checking it out. One of the things that really amazes me about portable ports is when a developer nails the feel of the original game. Tekken Advance is one of those games that, despite the limited hardware, if you've played the original Tekken games, you'll feel right at home here. Tekken Advance plays just like Tekken on the PS1. Instead of being fully 3D, Tekken Advance features pre-rendered sprites over 3D backgrounds, but while in motion, it looks just like PS1 Tekken. That's because the number of animation frames is high enough to mask the 2D nature of the sprites. Whereas the 2D sprites were fairly obvious in the Mortal Kombat GBA games, they're very smooth here, and it sells the faux 3D effect really well, especially on a small screen. The camera also does some fancy moves, such as zooming in during grabs or pushing out when the characters move apart. It's a nice little touch that makes this feel like a proper Tekken game and not just some cheap attempt to cash in on the license. Unfortunately, the character roster is rather limited and doesn't feature some of the more outrageous and fun Tekken characters like Kuma, Roger, or Alex. But if you like Tekken, you'll really like Tekken Advance. I really did not enjoy Tiger Woods PGA Tour Golf. The course is unbelievably ugly, with the ground level 3D looking like it was designed in MS Paint, and the top-down view looking like a blurry, unfinished mess. The only notable thing here is that the characters are actually full motion video, which reminds me of the old bar arcade game Golden Tee Golf. But even the faux 3D power bar looks horrendous. Oh, did you catch when I said course earlier and not courses? Yep, this game only has one single course. So I hope you like TPC Sawgrass because that's all you're ever going to be playing. I hope you don't like trees either because those have been completely removed as well. Fun fact, this game was made by Rebellion, the same developer who made Medal of Honor Underground on the GBA. It's all starting to come together. Skip this one entirely. Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2004 is an enormous improvement over the previous year's game. The courses look so much cleaner, with clearly defined boundaries between the rough and the fairway, the draw distance is better, and it's easier to read the hills and valleys of the landscape thanks to the checkerboard and stripe patterns mowed into the grass. The controls take inspiration from their console counterpoints too, letting you hold down the D-pad to pull back on your swing and push forward to swing through. It does make everything a bit easier since you're almost guaranteed a solid hit, whereas using a joystick on the console version has much more room for error than the linear up and down on the D-pad. But I much prefer this system over the previous year's hideous power bar control scheme. The characters are also very well animated 3D models instead of the full motion video characters in 2002. There are also a great variety of courses, each feeling unique. While Mario Golf Advance Tour is the most well-rounded golf game on the system, I think overall I actually prefer Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2004. I like the control scheme here more than I do the power meter system on most other golf games. The only downside to this release are the frequent load times. Every time the game cuts to the behind-the-back ground view, it loads for a second. It's not a deal breaker, but it did start to wear on me over time. If you like the home console Tiger Woods games, or if you're just looking for a good all-around golf game on the GBA, I highly recommend Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2004. It's really wild that these Tony Hawk GBA games resemble their original counterparts as well as they do. Despite the change in perspective, they are all surprisingly faithful demakes. Instead of fully 3D environments, the developer Vicarious Visions opted for 2D environments with 3D character models. The first one, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, obviously looks the roughest, with some really blocky and pixelated characters, but this was also my favorite as a kid. I played the heck out of this game. Truth be told, when I came back to this game for the review, it didn't quite hold up as well as I remembered it, but it still provided some nostalgic fun. Tony Hawk 3, 4, and Underground look almost identical, with some upgraded character models and more detailed 2D environments. Tony Hawk Underground 2 tried to push the character models even further and failed spectacularly. These are honestly some of the ugliest characters I've ever seen in a video game. Why their hands are bigger than their heads is beyond me. I'm very grateful that the developer ditched these monstrosities and went back to the more traditional characters for their final outing, American Skateland. This time, all the characters have a nice outline, intended to imitate the cel-shaded look of its DS counterpart. If you have a favorite mainline Tony Hawk game, I'd say pick that one up on the GBA and you won't be disappointed. If you've never played a Tony Hawk game, play one of the home console games first, because these portable versions work best as a simulacra of the real deal. The Tony Hawk games on the GBA are alright on their own, but as demakes of a beloved series, they're incredible. Back when IGN reviewed Tony Hawk Downhill Jam on the GBA, they said, quote, "The in-game graphics are ugly as sin." I get that the newly released DS also had a version of Downhill Jam that was much more impressive, but what we got here on the GBA is nothing short of a miracle. This game isn't ugly, it's beautiful. Tony Hawk Downhill Jam is one of the most technically impressive GBA games on the system. The number of polygons on screen at any one time is insane, coupled with the fact that it runs at a consistent frame rate. Sure, the draw distance isn't great, as when you get closer to cars, trucks, trees, and jumps, they'll load in their textures, but the level of detail and variety of each level more than makes up for this lack of a draw distance. And just look at these character animations. The blocky, polygonal level design really helps you make sense of the courses too, without giving you a headache. Downhill Jam was developed by Visual Impact, the team behind SSX Tricky and SSX 3 on the GBA, and you can feel their DNA, as this is an evolution of that core concept. It plays like a more refined version of SSX 3. Each level has multiple goals, like any good Tony Hawk game, and while some of the more in-depth goals are difficult to achieve, if you want to breeze through the game seeing all the levels, that's an option too. I had a blast with Tony Hawk Downhill Jam. It feels like the final iteration of a style of game Visual Impact has been working on over the lifespan of the GBA, and it's damn impressive. This actually might be my favorite Tony Hawk game on the GBA. I highly recommend checking this one out, despite what IGN thinks. For a budget title, Ultimate Winter Games has a surprisingly impressive 3D engine. Of the 4 games included in the package, 3 of them are in 3D. Skiing and snowboarding are the most impressive. Even with full 3D tracks and character models, the game runs surprisingly smoothly, especially compared to the SSX games. Granted, there is less going on here, but it's still a very smooth ride down the mountain. You play through various time trials to unlock new stages, and that's about it. The bobsledding game, though, sucks. It's essentially one of those mini-games from grinding in the Tony Hawk games, where you have to balance the circle within the line, and that's it. Overall, this is a really bare-bones package, but the skiing and snowboarding stages are fun enough to be worth a few runs of your time. We've seen a boat ton of skateboarding, snowboarding, and even rollerblading games on the GBA, but there's only ever been one wakeboarding game. Wakeboarding Unleashed featuring Shaun Murry released on home consoles as well as the GBA back in 2003. The GBA version is one of those games I'm surprised exists at all, and it's actually pretty cool. It plays kind of like a snowboarding game, as you're pulled forward by the boat so the level moves past you and it's your job to hit jumps, do tricks, and grind rails as they present themselves. You can't turn around and hit miss jumps like you could in a Tony Hawk game, but the trick system is pretty similar to the one found in Tony Hawk games. The 3D here looks nice too, using Mode 7 environments alongside impressively animated 3D character models. It has your standard career mode with various objectives in each level, ripped straight from Tony Hawk, as well as some other smaller modes, like a balloon pop mode and a rather solid tutorial. It plays well enough too, but sometimes I found it hard to judge perspective, and there's always tension on the rope when you get to the outside edges, so you'll just need some time to adjust to these details before you'll be truly mastering jumps and grinds. This might not be the best extreme sports game on the GBA, but it is one of the most interesting. There's never quite been anything else like it, and on that merit alone, I think it's worth checking out. Thanks so much for watching, and if there's any games that I missed, please let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.